and thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Peter Girizzo. I'm the superintendent of schools for the North Shore Public Schools, new to the district this year. I have a couple of opening remarks before I turn this over. It was once said by Nelson Mandela that an educated, enlightened, and informed population is one of the surest ways of promoting the health of a democracy. And I would like to thank our elected representatives for joining us here tonight. It's a rare occasion that all levels of government can be so well represented, and it speaks well to your commitment to all of us as your constituents. I value our partnership immensely, and I thank you on behalf of the entire North Shore community and our 2,633 students who we work tirelessly for every day. I extend my thanks to the Board of Education for enabling this structure to exist so that the voices of our community can be heard and understood, and to Dr. Herman Berliner for moderating this evening. I also thank the Legislative Action Committee and ask that we give them a round of applause for their hard work and planning. This is a night that does not come together easily, and there's a lot of moving parts here, so thank you for all of your hard work on our behalf. And finally, I extend a hearty Viking welcome to all of our visitors to the North Shore Schools tonight. And I will now turn this over in 1 second to Dr. Berliner, who will commence our activities. Senator Elaine Phillips, who cannot be here tonight, asked me to just read a short statement on her behalf. And she said, "Thank you to the Legislative Action Committee of the North Shore Schools Board of Education for inviting me to participate tonight. Regretfully, I cannot be with you tonight due to a previously scheduled event, but my staff is attending and will provide me with details on tonight's discussion. Please know that tonight's topics are of great importance to me and are issues I have been working on as your state senator. My colleagues and I continue our efforts to hold the line on taxes, increase foundation aid and funding for our schools, fight the opioid epidemic, and take action to protect our environment. I look forward to personally speaking with Superintendent Girizzo, the Board of Education, and the Legislative Action Committee on these and other issues in the near future. As always, I welcome you to contact me at any time with your individual questions or concerns. Thank you." So I enjoy your evening, and thank you once again for being here tonight. Appreciate it.
Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Let's get started as quickly as possible. I think this will be a helpful meeting for all of us. Our question categories tonight are testing, funding, charter schools, local control, tax caps, drugs, taxes, traffic, government, the Long Island economy, and then there will be a grab bag. That's the first 15 minutes. We'll go on. And then if these sound like Jeopardy categories, that's just a coincidence. I have the pleasure of asking the questions. Some of the questions include a brief preamble of basic information that will be helpful to those of us who may not be as familiar with the issues as our government officials are. And I think it's important for all of us to have that context. If in the course of the evening you think of an additional question, we have volunteers who can bring you a card to write down your question. Please just raise your hand. The volunteers are in the back of the auditorium. To begin the evening, though most of us know our public officials well, I think it would be a helpful reminder for our public officials to introduce themselves and spend a minute or two talking about their backgrounds. Let's start with Senator Marcellino.
We're starting from the middle and working in both directions.
Absolutely.
I like that. Good evening. My name is Carl Marcellino. I represent the 5th Senate District in the New York State Senate. The 5th Senate District is about 51% in Nassau County and about 49% in Suffolk County. We go from the city line of the North Hempstead border out to the Smithtown border. In Suffolk County. We come down through Dix Hills, touch Comac, come back through Melville, Hicksville, Syosset, Jericho, and then up north to where we are now. So it's a diverse district. It's about 315,000 people occupy the district residentially. It is, I don't like the term middle class because I don't know what it really means. It's got every economic bracket that you could think of in the district. We have all racial components in the district. We have all religious components in the district that you can think of. They're all there. They're all represented. So it's when I said diverse, I meant it. It is a difficult district to get a handle on, but over the last 20 years, I think I've managed to do that. And part of that process is you start meeting with groups. You start getting into organizations, you bring them in. For example, I meet with the school superintendents that I represent. I represent about 14 different school districts in both counties. The job is to meet with the superintendents or their representatives on a regular basis, at least once or twice a year in my district office, so that we can talk about the issues of concern, what's going on, what do they need, what do they think should be done, and what I should do for them in the state senate, representing them in the state senate. It's proven to be a very healthy exchange of thoughts and ideas, not always the most pleasant way to go, because sometimes the superintendents are not happy with what's going on in Albany or what they think is going on in Albany. And it's my job to take the temperature of the people and find out what's happening, and then bring that back so that we can exercise change where necessary, when it deals with legislation or when it deals with just talking to my colleagues up there to let them know this is what's really going on, what's really happening, and not necessarily what you see a headline doesn't necessarily mean what they think it means. So the present is going. We have the governor recently just did his budget presentation to the legislature. The budget is a wish list. The headline in Newsday today, if you saw it, said 2.3% aid increase to schools. That's true in some cases. It's not true in other cases. Some got more, some got less. It's an average. So we have to look at that. But that, again, that's his wish list. Understand that. The process is just beginning. The Senate will put together its wish list in the next few weeks. The Assembly will do likewise. So we're going to have 3 different budgets produced. And they're going to be different, wildly different in some cases, numbers-wise. And then we're going to put them together, merge the 3, and hopefully get it done by April 1st. That's when we're supposed to do and for the last 7 years, we've been very successful in getting that done. It's not always been the case, but for the last 7 years, we've been able to get a budget on time so that the districts know what they're doing, can plan ahead, the municipalities can plan ahead, local towns, villages, and the like can plan ahead and know what's going on statewide when they have a budget that they're working with, where they know the money is there and they know what they're looking at. So it's an interesting time to deal with it, but again, the number that you saw today, just the first step. It's a wish list, and I would look at it, frankly, from my point of view, it's a floor. It's not a ceiling, it's a floor.
Okay, thank you. Assemblyman Levine.
Thanks, Dr. Berliner, and I want to thank the Legislative Action Committee, and I especially want to thank all of you who are here on this very, very cold evening. It's a tribute to this community, and when I say this community, I'm talking about the North Shore School District community. We have had a lot of controversy over the course of the last, well, it's more than a few years, about the quality of education, public education. Now, I'm a proponent of public education. Without public education, I would have received, my brothers and I would have received no education whatsoever. The thought of paying for education for my brothers and myself would have been so foreign a concept to my parents that it would never, ever have been considered. And I also have the good fortune of being married to my wife Ronnie, who taught public school both in the South Bronx and in the city of Glen Cove for many years. So public education is the heart and soul of our nation. It is the heart and soul of our American democracy. It's under fire. This school district boasts some of the best scores of all students on Long Island, and it is the heart and soul of this community, and it's why you have moved into this community, because your investment in the school district, or your investment in your homes, is the soundest investment you will ever make, and the value of your homes reflects that. Now, our budget this year is going to have some unique challenges. We have little idea of what to expect from the federal government in terms of help for the state of New York. We have a lot of ideas about the detriment that the current tax plan is going to cause those of us on Long Island. Each of us has now been sentenced to pay an extra 25% in terms of property taxes so that we can help subsidize some of the states that we New Yorkers have subsidized for an awfully long time. But let me just return to your school district. The controversy over the years has been that our students don't measure up. In standardized testing, they do not measure up to the kids from Hong Kong, the kids from Singapore, and the kids from Finland. That is a specious comparison. We're a nation of over 300 million people. All those countries are small, homogeneous places with none of the challenges that we have as a great nation. But let's be honest. If we just took the scores from the kids from North Shore, those kids compete at the same level or a better level than those kids from those countries that are supposed to be so superior to us. So I think we have, as a nation and as a state, a lot to learn from school districts like your school district. So this year we are $4 billion short in terms of our state budget. Now we can manage that. We have, Carl and I have seen the years when it's been over $4 billion. We have worked with budgets where we've been over $10 and $11 billion short. So I'm not trying to say this is going to be easy, but what complicates this tremendously is we are losing $2 billion, New York State, all of us, in federal funding for health care programs. And over the course of the coming years, we'll be losing more and more and more. So I think that Carl is right. I think that the amount of money for our school districts this year, our public school districts, will go up, and that whatever we've got now is a floor and not a ceiling. My fear is not so much for this year. My dire and abject fear is for next year. So I think we will get through this, but we need everyone who believes in public education to stay strong, stand up for the concept of public education, and I'm delighted to be here this evening, and thank you again.
Assemblyman Ra.
Thank you. Good evening. I represent the 19th Assembly District, which starts down in West Hempstead and Franklin Square and comes all the way up into this area. I've had the opportunity in my time in the Assembly to serve up until last year as the ranking member on the Education Committee. So many of the policy issues and educational issues are ones that I certainly enjoy the opportunity to discuss and work on along with my colleagues, all of whom we have I think we're fortunate in this area to have a mix of political parties because I think both Chuck and Carl and Mike would agree when it comes to Long Island and our local issues, we're able to come together and work on what we need to do locally, regardless of a letter next to your name, which is, especially in these times, a difficult thing. We, like the senator and the assemblyman said, are at the very beginning right now of our formal budget process. The governor just made his proposal, his executive budget proposal. We have weeks ahead of hearings of every different topic, from elementary and secondary education to higher education to healthcare to transportation, and what will come out of that is those proposals that the majorities will make in their respective houses, and then we'll start moving towards that April 1st date and trying to do everything we can to get the fair share for our local districts here on Long Island. Anytime you have a formula, you have the opportunity for districts that are going to do well on that formula, and then districts that maybe aren't going to do so well. And that's one of the complicating things about the school aid formula, is that when you have a place like Long Island, which is an expensive place to live, what a district is on paper in terms of all these different factors that go into the formula doesn't always work out when that number spits out the other end. So that's one of the things that we'll be contending with as we go forward. But I thank the LAC, the school board, and the community for having us here this evening.
Assemblyman Montesano.
Thank you. My name is Mike Montesano. I'm the Assemblyman for the 15th Assembly District, which starts up in Bayville, Locust Valley, and comes all the ways down, like to refer to the 106-107 corridor into the village of Farmingdale and Bethpage. I cover the east side of Glen Head, east of Glen Cove Road. That's where I reside. I'm a resident of Glen Head, and I'm a former school board member here at the district, a former board president. I had the pleasure to serve for a couple of years. And, my colleagues have said it all so far, so I'm just, happy to be here with you this evening. I look forward to taking your questions and hopefully provide you with some information which helps you going forward and making some decisions as we move ahead, in the budget process. We've always advocated, all of us here, for more funding from the governor. We've been fortunate in the past years to be successful in getting it for our school district and the surrounding school districts. Within my assembly district, I have 11 different school districts, and because of they have diverse economic issues, population, student population, and needs, as well as the areas that I cover. On the east side of the district, is Oyster Bay, Cove, Laurel Hollow, all those areas, and then Westbury, Newcastle have their challenges, and then I cover Hicksville and all those other areas, parts of Plainview, Jericho. So we have a very diverse area that we work towards. So these types of forums are very helpful for us to garner some information so we can take that back with us to Albany. Those of us sitting here, myself, Ed Ra, Chuck Levine, and Senator Marcelino, every year, put our heads together diligently to deliver what we can for the best of our school districts. And thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Legislator Reggie Whitten.
Thank you so much. My name is Delia DeRiggi Whitten. I am just starting my 4th term as Nassau County Legislator, and prior to that, I was a Glen Cove City Councilwoman. I grew up in Glen Cove, graduated Glen Cove High School, and I'm a Hofstra grad. I am the proud mother of 3 kids, 2 in college and 1 in 8th grade. I'm a single mom, and I know what it's like to want to live in this area and enjoy all the benefits we have, yet try to balance that with what seems to be a wave of increasing fees and expenses. Since I've been your legislator, we've had a couple of challenges, from starting with Sandy to the LIPA plant decommissioning to everything that's going on with the opioids, which is a huge issue for us, as well as environmental issues with different beaches where we're all connected with Hempstead Harbor. I represent Glen Cove, Seacliff, part of Glen Head, Glenwood Landing, part of Roslyn, and Port Washington. Josh and I were just mentioning that some of these issues we don't have as much say with as far as budgeting for the schools, but there are a number of issues we are involved in, including, I'm concerned, we were just discussing about the safety of our kids walking to school on these sidewalks, and we just got an estimate just for this small sidewalk. It's $6 million to put in across the street, but Josh and I are committed to try to get that looked at and seriously considered for the next capital budget. So I love representing this area. I have a very smart, strong community, and I've seen you all in action when time calls for it. And I'm proud of the jobs that you do, and I'm very proud to represent you. And thank you for having us, all of you.
And now legislator and very recent board member Lafazan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Delia. And from a former Glen Cove City Councilwoman, shout out to Marcia Silverman. Is Marcia here? New Glen Cove City Councilwoman. So very excited for her. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Joshua Lafazan. I am the new legislator for District 18. District 18 is northeast Nassau County. Goes from the border of Nassau and Suffolk, Syosset, Woodbury, all the way west to East Hills and Glen Head, north to the water in Bayville, and everything in between. So we carry a lot of distance and put a lot of miles on the odometer going from event to event. This is weird for me because I'm really on my best behavior when I have my senator and my assemblyman at this table, but I also have a bunch of my former teachers from Syosset High School here. Hi, Ms. Lamont. wasn't too long when detention was an option on the table. So I'm on my best behavior, but I'm truly excited to be here, and I'm truly excited to represent the area with Delia. If you recognize me, it's because, yes, in 2012, at the age of 18, I became one of New York's youngest elected officials when I was elected to the Syosset School Board of Education, which I was thrilled to serve on up until about 3 weeks ago, in which I now find myself in my new capacity as Nassau County Legislator. I actually started my academic career at Nassau Community College. Proud graduate of Nassau Community College class of 2014. I then transferred to Cornell University, where I got a degree in Industrial and Labor Relations from the ILR school. And this May, I actually graduated from Harvard with my master's in Education Policy and Management. So to all you high school kids here, please watch my TED Talk. It's called Community College to Harvard, because we have amazing kids at Nassau going to the Ivies every single day. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. Three things, because I'll be brief. Number one, I pride myself on having the most robust internship program in Nassau County legislative history. We had 50 high school and college kids, average age of 16, working on our campaign. I plan to have an even bigger and more robust program working for me as your legislator this summer. So if you know any high school or college kids, preferably in the district, but could be from around the area, of course, Delia's district, I'm looking for bright, motivated, energetic young kids who want to get off the sidelines and work in government and make a difference. So I'm going to leave my cards here. People tell me that I'm too young to serve in this office, so I never tell an intern they're too young to work for me. I had Neil at 12 work the phones, and no one said no to Neil when he asked for their vote. That's number one. Number two is I'm planning on having what I call, there's a debate over the name, either Coffee with Josh, or it was suggested to me, Java with Josh, which are my town halls. I'm going to have one in every town in the district by the time my term is done. I'm starting in Glen Head. We're going to schedule this for March. I'll hopefully put something out in the Glen Head Library, but I'll let you all know, and this is the time where I can be accessible to you also. I look forward to meeting from you and hearing your questions. And number three, just back to all the high school kids here and any kids here. Thank you for showing up, because A, I'm tired of being the youngest person in the audience in these things, but B, and more importantly, the decisions that the individuals on this dais make, yes, they affect current property owners, but they really affect us, because we're the ones, flash forward in 30 and 40 years, who are going to be in this audience asking the questions. So the fact that we show up, even though some of us can't vote, we show up and we hold our elected officials accountable means a lot to me as a former senior Syosset High School senior class president. So thanks for showing up, and I hope I see some of you in the white shirts in my campaign office this summer. Thank you.
Now, let's go into some of the specifics. We've already heard a very strong commitment to public education. Now, let's really drill down to some of the details. At this moment, there's a moratorium on the use of grades, 3 to 8 state ELA and math test scores in teacher evaluations, but this will be expiring shortly. The most current legislation, Education Law 3012-D, sets the contribution of test results at 50% of a teacher's evaluation. This high-stakes nature of testing has been a major driver of the opt-out movement, especially on Long Island. Would you sponsor legislation that develops standards for districts so that high-achieving districts, such as this one, can exercise local control over evaluating our teachers, defining our curriculum, and educating our children? What do you see as the hurdles to implementing a system of local control for those meeting the standards? We'll give everyone an opportunity. Whoever would like to start, please go ahead and start. And hopefully someone would like to start.
I will.
Thank you.
I already have introduced legislation to repeal that statute that, as the governor put it forward. I think we need to basically pull back and do this the right way. Anybody who's familiar with this topic, it really has changed numerous times by statute, and each time I compare it to if you're familiar with the Peanuts cartoons, the Charlie Brown with the football, because the districts, each time this changes, the districts have to basically have a negotiation with their local bargaining unit, figure out how they're going to factor in all these things, and then a couple of years later, all of a sudden, there's a new piece of legislation changing it. So Commissioner Elia has already stated, she set out a schedule on a number of things when she took over as commissioner, including the standards themselves, the testing program, and teacher evaluations. And she pegged the 2019-2020 school year to be a year that she wants to see a new teacher evaluation system in place. She spoke about this recently and basically is going to be starting an outreach program to get feedback from teachers and hopefully travel around the state and get feedback from administrators and others on what this is going to look like. But at the end of the day, as you mentioned, 3012D remains in the education law, and I think one way or another, we're going to have to revisit that in some way to make sure that the department ultimately is going to have the power to put forth the system that they come up with.
Okay, Carl?
The law that put everything back to 1920 school year was my law. The Common Core and the APPR and all of that was introduced terribly statewide. It was an abomination the way it was brought in. Nobody really understood it. And it was sent to the school districts with a mixed message of how to do it and the rules, and was just a mess. It was handled poorly. So we said, let's postpone everything. Let's not jump on their backs. Let's give people time to breathe, give the districts a chance to discuss, talk about the issues. The school districts know what they're doing. Not every district is the same. Every district has their own unique qualities and unique capabilities in residential mix as well as the staffing. So let them deal with it. A child at the end of the 8th grade should be reading at an 8th grade level. How you get there is the district's business, as long as you get there and the reading level is the same. So that we're going to give you the flexibility to do what you have to do, to reach those goals the way you feel is best for this district. Let them do it. As long as they're doing what has to be done, as long as the kids are getting a well-rounded education, as long as they're getting the knowledge that they need, and as long as the teachers feel that they have the support of the district and of the state. And as chair of the education committee now, I will make sure, because I'm in constant contact with Ilya and the chancellor from the city of New York, and we make sure that everybody's on the same page. We want to make sure that we're moving forward with the same flexibility. I don't want to see everybody have to do everything in lockstep, because that isn't the way it is. This district is unique. Great Neck is unique. Syosset is unique. Jericho is unique, and they should be. Huntington is unique, and South Huntington is unique. So they should be treated in their own way, with their own respect. The only thing that you say is, when a youngster is finished with the 8th grade, they're reading at an 8th grade level, and that's demonstrable. And you can test it, and you can show it. That's all we say. How you get that kid to that 8th grade reading level, frankly, works within the district. Let them do what they have to do. They know the best. They know the kids best. They know the families best, and they know what goes on best. So I am one that says, open the door. Let's breathe some fresh air into this situation. Have faith in your professionals, who are the workers, who know what they're doing. Otherwise, they shouldn't be there. You have a superintendent of schools. That superintendent should be hiring quality people. If he doesn't, the school board should be leaning on him and saying, hey, what's going on here? There's a checks and balances situation here. Let the people in the district do what they have to do, and the youngsters will benefit from it, because then there's coordination. And the idea that they'll get to the same place, ultimately they will. I have no problem giving each district its flexibility to do the work that they have to do. I have visited every single district that I represent personally, and I have visited many throughout the state. And they're all working hard for their students. They all care, for one thing, to make sure that the kids have the ability to function and perform and get the best possible education that they can in the time they're in the schools.
Right. Anyone else?
When we spoke a little earlier about the specious comparisons of the scores of American students with students in Singapore and Finland, there are some who take that discrepancy to mean that American education is a failure. And if you haven't read Diane Ravitch's wonderful book, Reign, R-E-I-G-N, of Error, you should, because we have caused great damage to our teachers, our administrators, and our students as a result of a slavish devotion to drop-dead testing and to rigid test taking. it has stifled creativity. It eats up too much time of our instructors' days, and we should not be teaching to the test. We should be teaching our students to be self-reliant, good people, critical thinkers, and well-educated people. Now, I would certainly back anything that will move us away from this horribly rigid system that we have, which in fact was a punitive system. John King, who was then our Commissioner of Education, that is Mary Ellen Elia's predecessor, came out of the charter school movement and remains a champion of the charter school movement. Well, the charter school movement is really not very popular out here on Long Island, where we have a lot of school districts, but we have many of the best school districts in the country. We have to stand strongly for public education, and we have to demand that all of our legislators, both in the state of New York and in the nation's capital, stand against this horribly rigid system which is causing great damage to our students and great damage to public education.
By the way, it's a little-known fact, Mr. King never taught in a classroom.
So I think since we have an opening on the issue of charter schools, I'm going to go slightly out of order and ask a question related to charter schools. Charter schools do not have elected school boards. Their budgets are not subject to public vote. They do not have to accept students with learning differences. Charter schools lack the oversight and accountability that public schools have, while at the same time charter schools are permitted to operate without many of the very costly state and federal mandates. Yet charter schools are given a significant amount of operational discretion and have a much more flexible operating environment. These advantages allow these schools to try new ideas or alternative strategies that are not always available to traditional public school districts. Districts such as North Shore should also have greater flexibility and local control with regard to curriculum testing and teacher evaluation. How will you support establishing greater operational flexibility and more local control for our schools? Mike?
Yeah, presently, you know, I've supported some legislation that deals with this APPR. You know, if you're going to evaluate teachers, first of all, you know, again, as been said before, every school district is different, the personnel is different, the student body is different. You can't, while you could have some basic measuring tools to evaluate a teacher, you have to take into consideration, you know, the classroom population they have and the different issues that they have in their classrooms. And that's one of the big changes that has to take place. But I can never understand why, because we do provide funding to charter schools, is why we allow them to have such a free hand and yet handcuff our regular public school system. We just have so many regulations that are outdated, that are unnecessary, and you can't use the same brush to paint everybody the same. So, you know, I'm standing up for that. We have different pieces of legislation that are being considered. There's a movement in that direction to restore local control because nobody knows their district better than the administrators, superintendents, and teachers within a school district. And I think if it's been working for charter schools, it'll certainly work for the regular public schools.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Charter schools are a big business, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and many people who are extraordinarily influential and powerful have vested interests in the charter schools. We will struggle in New York State to move towards greater accountability for these charter schools. But if I led you to believe or suggested that that's going to be an easy proposition, I would be lying to you. The charter school movement 3 or 4 years ago, I should say the charter school movement, those who backed the charter school movement, backed a proposition that would have provided a tax credit for anyone who wanted to contribute to a private or a charter school. And they would get back, originally the concept was they'd get back 90% of however much they were contributing. Eventually the governor at that time was pushing something that called for 75%. that would have been extraordinarily detrimental to public education because it would have taken money that we should be using for public education away from public education. This is an extraordinarily serious challenge. We all know it. We know it on Long Island, and that's why there are only a handful of charter schools on all of Long Island. And we ought to all do our best to keep it that way.
Right now, no money is taken from the public schools and goes to charter schools. The public schools get what they're supposed to by formula, they get what they're supposed to by law, they get the numbers, anything that goes to charter schools is extra allocation.
Carl, I don't think that less money going into the state of New York helps public education. It certainly helps private education. And that's why that bill, I think, was passed overwhelmingly with your support in the state Senate.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%, Chuck. The nature of the beast with charter schools is that they exist where there is a lack of empathy or thought about the public schools, which is why on Long Island they don't really exist. We have maybe 4 or 5 throughout the entire island, as opposed to, I think there's 126 districts on Long Island. You may have 4 or 5 charter schools in total on the island. They are in greater number in other areas where people have no faith in the public schools or have lost faith in the public schools and are seeking an alternative to the public schools. We don't have that problem here on the island. And the idea of funding and keeping it that way is important, that we maintain, as we've said, the flexibility. We give our professionals the chance to do what they do best, that is analyze the districts, analyze their students, analyze their communities, and make sure that the education of the kids is focused on our students in the best possible way, with the most flexibility that we can give them. The teachers get to feel that they are supported by their school boards and by the professionals, the other professionals that run the district. That's important, that they feel that there's a connect there, that they're not operating on their own, and that there's someone looking over their shoulder, ready to snap down on them if there's a mistake made or if there's an error. That's not what we want. And that's not what we have on the island at this point in time, which is why you have so few charter schools here. There's no room for them, and there's no place that supplies them the nurturing that they need to survive. That's not the same in other parts of the state, and that's something we have to work on statewide. But right now, the island is doing very, very well, and the districts on the island are doing very, very well in educating our students. Is it 100% great? No, nothing is. But you go far and wide before you find places that are much better.
Carl, I'm sure you and I agree on the quality of public education on Long Island, and I'm sure you and I both agree on the importance of making sure that the state of New York, which for the past 7 years has operated under a 2% spending cap each year, and that's why our budgets have not gone up substantially, as have many other states. But we are playing it very close to the bone in terms of our budgets, and I'm sure you and I both agree that we ought to make sure that we have as much public money available to spend on all the important programs that are required for New York State, including health, because we're now going to face a health crisis, and including health spending crisis, thanks to our friends in the federal government, and education, because we're going to face another crisis with respect to money available for education. So I want to keep as many public dollars in the state treasury as possible. And my personal sense is that if I am so interested in making a charitable contribution to a private institution, I ought to have the freedom to do that, and I do have the freedom to do it. But if I have $1.5 million that I want to contribute to a private school, I don't think that the state of New York should subsidize me to the tune of $1.3 million coming back in a tax credit. You and I see this differently.
Okay, if we can move on, I have 68 more questions.
Dr. Berliner,
Josh, yeah,
point
of
of
course.
personal privilege
Of course.
for Delia and I. We're both honored guests at Bayville Mayor Paul Rupp's Bayville Beautification Committee. Mayor Ed Lieberman, I wouldn't be late on you, so if you wouldn't mind, if you'd entertain me, I have 3 things that I'm working on in the county. I'd like to address the guests, and I think Delia maybe would do the same, and then we could leave.
I think that's reasonable. Please go ahead.
I told you I'm on my best behavior. First and foremost, heroin and opioids are the greatest natural disaster of our times, and not one generation has been hit worse than the millennial generation, which is why I've chosen to make this the legacy I hope to leave in the Nassau County Legislature. 62,000 American lives in 2016, 1,000 Long Island lives in 2016 we've lost. All preventable loss of life. So I held my first press conference about 2 days after I got sworn in. Delia was there standing with me, and Delia actually proposed legislation before I got in that she's going to talk about, but I laid out a 5-point plan, which I am not so naive as to believe will eradicate the epidemic, but I believe will make a real dent here in Nassau County. First and foremost, I believe that we need what I call a 24-hour open access center, almost like an urgent care, where anyone in any community, 24 hours a day in Nassau County, either if they're sick and suffering from disease or if they have a loved one who needs care, can come 24 hours a day for immediate screening, intervention, and referral to treatment. I believe that having a single unified location will facilitate a warmer handoff to a long-term treatment facility. In a world today, we need to totally reimagine our system of treatment with end-to-end care, folks, because in a world where with the tap of a button on your phone you could order a cheeseburger or a flat-screen television or an actual human being of an Uber driver to your door, to expect somebody or a family member in the throes of such a horrible disease to go online and do proprietary research and find treatment availability, which so scarcely exists, is simply unreasonable. So I want a 24-hour open access center coupled with a 24-hour addiction crisis hotline, a hotline dedicated specifically to addiction. Linda Leonard at the Long Island Crisis Center runs a hotline. About 16% of her calls come in for substance abuse. Let's pick a hotline like they did in Suffolk County. I believe they saw a 109% spike in calls. Let's plaster that hotline. Every high school classroom, every PTA meeting disseminating it, every sports league disseminating it. That hotline. Terry Kroll, who's my personal hero, who spoke at the press conference, lost her son Timothy 8 years ago to addiction. She said that she'd pace up and down Nassau County Medical Center looking for help, and that if a single unified hotline exists, that her son might still be there. If that doesn't motivate us to get the job done, I don't know what does. And this is the bipartisan issue of the 21st century. So 24-hour hotline, 24-hour open access center. I want sober dorms or substance-free dormitories available at every college in Nassau County. Okay, I'm a millennial who doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and doesn't do drugs, and it's incredibly difficult for me to have navigated the campus scene at Harvard and Cornell. Now, for a kid in the throes of addiction or for a kid in recovery, amplify that experience. So setting aside dorms so kids are not thrown back into the very same ecosystems which fermented their original problems, I believe will save lives. We do it at the state level. About 11 SUNYs do it. Let's do it in Nassau County. Number 4, we need a recovery center. Okay, Suffolk opened up what's called the Thrive Center, which was funded through a New York State OASIS grant and filtered through 4 nonprofits. Okay, again, it's a place where young people in recovery can go to socialize. Because we know, folks, that prevention works. Okay, investing money in treatment is a categorical imperative. But investing money in prevention is just pragmatic. So investing in a recovery center where young people can go to be safe, where young people can go and socialize without drugs or alcohol and to be supervised and to have money invested in resources makes sense. We have Thrive in Suffolk, we need one in Nassau. And number 5, I want to train every Nassau County employee in the administration of Narcan. This is something I'll be teaming up with Legislator Drucker and I hope with Legislator DeRidge-Witten to host Narcan trainings in our communities. Okay, pretty much all of our emergency and medical personnel are outfitted with Narcan. Every Nassau County employee, let's train them in Narcan. What a boost to our communities that would be. It's heroin and opioids, and if you indulge me for 2 minutes, number 2 I'm working on is keeping my generation here on Long Island. Self-admittedly, I live in mom and dad's basement. I graduated in May, and she's not here, so I can say it. It's equally as miserable as it sounds. It is absolutely. My apartment at Harvard was 400 square feet, and I lived like a king in a palace because my mom and dad weren't there. And if we expect, I often laugh because we hear, a lot of elected officials from across the state, across New York State, talking about, Amazon, bow down to Jeff Bezos, come here to Long Island. Why would Amazon come here when our best and brightest are not staying here? Okay, Carl hit on it, Chuck hit on it, Ed and Mike, you guys, all 4 of you hit on it actually. And I don't even know if you knew that Long Island has some of the best public schools in the world. We're in one of the best public schools, not in the country, but in the world. And our best and brightest are going off to college, and like my best friends, they're going to New York City or they're going to Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Texas. They're not staying here. So we need, just like we do for seniors, to build dedicated youth housing Okay, we can work out the logistics with maybe an age limit or a maximum lease to ensure fluidity of the occupants, but we need to build housing for young people by our train stations, transit-oriented development. And while we're at it, let's give them a discounted LIRR ticket, because $400 a month is already unreasonable for transportation, but when you're paying off student loans, it's a death sentence. And we need to build the cool downtowns of the future so my generation not only can afford to live here and stay here, but wants to stay here. That's number 2. Last but not least, I'm serving as your legislator, and I'm focusing on ethics reform in Nassau County. We need term limits for elected officials, and I believe if we had term limits, I believe we'd get back to the focus that public service is a privilege. Number 2, I think we need to eliminate some campaign finance loopholes in Nassau County so we know exactly when a contractor goes for a bid, we know exactly who they donated to. And number 3, I will post for every single meeting of my tenure in every office I occupy, I'll post a justification of every vote I take on Facebook. So if you want to know how I vote, check it out on Facebook. I urge my colleagues to do the same. That's about all I have for you this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, last but not least, if I haven't bored you already, I want to thank Larry and George and many of the committee, James Versaki, who have been working with the American water issue. I've been able to successfully broker a deal between our working group and the Jericho Water District on February 7th at 9 a.m., in which we could hopefully move forward. And I don't want to speak out of turn here, but if an eventual consolidation plan was to take place, Jericho would have to be amenable to it, and I'm looking forward to a productive meeting. You guys have an amazing, active grassroots community here, and I'm looking forward to putting that issue to bed once and for all. Thank you.
Delia?
Is that it? I really appreciate your indulgence. Unfortunately, this is our 3rd stop out of 4 tonight, and but it's very important to be here. And Josh did hit on a number of things. I have 3 kids. Josh is not one of them, although some people have already thought I'm his mother. That's been one humbling experience so far. But I'm very impressed with his motivation and his view, and I'm happy to work alongside with him. Just hitting quick, Narcan, we have a program for training on March 4th at the temple on the corner of Newwoods Road and Crescent Beach Road in Glen Cove, 7 o'clock. If anyone needs further information, you're more than welcome to call my office. Opioid situation is a scary thing, and I'm just proud that North Shore Schools were one of the first ones to host the Narcan training, and you're addressing it like everything else with a very straightforward movement. I'm the mom of 3 kids, and each 3 of them learns in a different way. I think any parent can tell you that, and some did very well with certain teachers and some didn't, and that's just my little small sample of 3 kids. I appreciate, what Senator Marcelino said and many other people, which is that, Common Core math, I was ranking on finance in Nassau County, and I would come home and have absolutely no idea what to do with the homework. It blew me away, and it was just, okay, you know it, learn it, go. They didn't go through the proper steps from starting with multiplication tables. It was amazing, but my daughter was not even taught, my 3rd daughter was not taught the multiplication tables in the way that the other 2 were. So it never went to the next step. It was just thrown at her. And I'm very happy to see that this is being reevaluated. I'm sure some kids could pick it up that quick, but some kids can't. So to keep control over our school districts it's common sense. Teaching is much more than just a science. It's an art, and we can't forget both components. So American Water has been another fight that I'm proud to see my fellow colleagues fighting. It's an interesting process because I have a good feeling that we're going to have a good result. And I got a call today from the governor's office. It wasn't even me calling, which is another new step. And basically, I said, the number one thing in this area is going to be this American Water. And I was told that it's completely on the governor's radar, and then he has a few steps, a few ideas. I told her that it's Lisa Santaramo from Cuomo's office that we're going to need funding if we're going to do any of these plans that Josh had mentioned with Jericho Water or whatever else it is. And I can tell you one thing, Town of Oyster Bay probably doesn't have it, and I can pretty much tell you the county is going to have a hard time getting it. I think it's going to have to come from the state. And her answer to me was, we're well aware of it. And she told me and straight out that she thinks he's going to have an announcement soon with some type of plan to back. I think we're going to have to be the ones to pick the plan and guide the plan, but I know we have his ear now, which I didn't feel we had about 6 months ago. So it's really a tribute to many of the people in this room that have fought and organized, and I'm enjoying being part of it because I have an optimistic feeling towards the end. So again, I feel bad. I hate to leave. This is one of our I really enjoy hearing your issues. But my number, I'll leave my cards with Josh. If there's ever anything, we are 100% with you. And I am so proud to represent you. So thank you very much for that honor.
So let's move on with our questions. Many state exams are not made public in their entirety. Only about 75% of the questions are released. Further, teachers are required to sign confidentiality agreements promising not to discuss the exam with colleagues. Discussing exam questions, whether it's to check the validity, the appropriateness, or the correct answer, is critical for learning as well as making the test better. Will you support the timely public release of each and every exam in its entirety? And please respond to that.
Yes.
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 So, okay, let's move on to the next question. The voice of citizens heard by their elected representatives is a critical component of our democracy. I think we all agree with that. With regard to the state testing, many parents feel they are only able to make their voice heard by opting their children out of tests. However, the threatened penalty of voicing dissent could be the withholding of state aid to schools with even moderate opt-out rates. How will you protect the right of your constituents to continue to voice their views?
The anxiety that parents have, that children have, that teachers and administrators have about this punitive and rigid system is so terrible that I understand very well why many parents want to opt out. I'm sure there are any number of parents who know their kids would score at the top of these tests who are opting out anyway. It is a punitive system. I have supported the opt-out movement from the beginning. Jeanette Duderman was a featured speaker at a forum I held at Glen Cove City Hall years ago. We have seen this coming for a long time. All we can do is fight. And I have great admiration for parents who will rebel against an unfair system. I stand with them. I think it would bring great shame and derision on the state of New York to actually punish the school districts in which the children have opted out. And I think we've pretty much been able to avoid that. We were actually able to avoid that even when we had a zealot, John King, running the state education department. And we'll continue. We will continue with that battle.
Carl?
I couldn't agree more with Chuck. The way the Common Core was implemented, as I said earlier, was poor. It wasn't properly done. People were not given proper instructions. The staffs were not properly trained in the methodologies that would be necessary. The community was not informed as to what was going on. So you had this, I don't know what's happening, and people were throwing up their hands in disgust and frustration. John King was a proponent of this, and as I said before, never taught in a school, never taught in a classroom. So his knowledge of teaching came out of a book, not out of practicality, not out of being in front of a classroom of students and having to impart ideas and thoughts to these to kids. So this concept has been abused. Mary Ellen Elia is a different breed of cat. She wants to change. She's looking to change. She's reaching out to the different organizations, to the NICET, to the unions, to school districts all over the state to get their input and their feedback on this issue and how to do it and how to handle it correctly. We have to deal with the federal government because a good part of the requirements come out of the feds at this point in time, so we still have to deal with them. But if we come up with the right proposals in the right way, then we can go to our federal representatives and they can then put pressure on and get us what we need to do and even this process out. Right now, we have the beginnings of a good working group at the state level, and I'm pleased with what I'm seeing. I'm pleased with the fact that they are aware that what's been done has been negative. It's not been a strong thing. It's not been good for the kids. It's not been good for education, public or otherwise. So we're heading in the right direction. The trick now is to keep it going in the right direction. I have, we're looking at legislation that would help out. And when we need that, I'm going to be talking to Chuck and for sponsorship in the Assembly so that we can get things, and Mike as well, and Ed, so that we can get things going in the right direction and moving to protect the kids. The whole idea is to make sure that teaching is done at the highest level with the greatest flexibility because you need it. You need to be flexible. As I said before, the districts are not all the same. And as you heard from Delia, kids learn in different ways. Kids don't all learn. Some kids have to read it, some kids have to write it, and some kids have to listen to it. That's the way they learn. And you have to treat them properly. You have to give them that opportunity within a classroom. The teacher has to be aware of that, and no one is better to understand what a kid needs and how a kid learns than the teacher in the classroom sits with them and works with them and talks to their parents. That's a key element in the whole process. And I think John King kind of lost sight of the whole thing, was trying to ram something through that, frankly, you can't do.
Let me share a little of the backstory with you, because you might think that what goes on in Albany is very clinical and cold and boring. It's actually anything but. So when it finally dawned on King that it was time for him to leave, which wasn't easy, he then went to work for Obama's administration. President Obama, who I had great respect for, I did not share his view on testing. He was a proponent of testing. Oh, by the way, our present president during the campaign was anti-testing, and yet we have to hear a word from him on helping to implement a more rational policy coming out of Washington. But at any rate, when King was finally nudged out, he went to work for Obama. Now, he had a commissioner's position, or a top administrative position, but that position would have required that King be taken before the Senate for confirmation. At that point, the rigidity of the testing, the drop-dead testing, Common Core, was so unpopular that Obama couldn't take him to the Senate, and Obama made him what's called a midnight appointment, appointed him on a day in which the Senate was not in session. But I don't care what he did, as long as we got rid of him. That made me happy, and I know I wasn't the only person happy because of that.
Amen, brother.
That's for sure. The one thing I just
Sure.
on that as well. First off, we should never punish the districts or the parents for doing what they believe to be right for their individual children, and that's really what is that is what it was lacking in a lot of these things that Chuck and Carl are talking about, is that focus on the unique learning needs of each individual child. But it circles back a little bit to that previous question about flexibility. The senator was talking earlier about things that he's working on to have the district say, when the state says we want you to do X, for the district to be able to say, well, this is our way of doing X, and the state says, okay, we don't need to micromanage how you're going to do that. And down the line, hopefully, we get that relationship between the state and the federal government. That would be tremendously helpful when you talk about testing, because it is still mandated 328 federally. And if we ever got to a point that the federal government says we need you to show you're meeting benchmark X, Y, and Z, that the state would have the ability to say, okay, we're going to show we're doing that in this way because this is what works for us and what provides appropriate flexibility to our local districts, as opposed to just saying, no, every state in the nation, make you test each of these years, this is how you have to do it, and that's what gets us to where we are now with this issue.
So just a wrap-up question in this area. Are there any metrics in use in other states that measure the effectiveness of public education that you would like to see New York use?
No.
Okay.
Frankly, no. We look at New York. New York is we'll pat ourselves on the back a little bit here, but we are a leader in education nationwide. There is no state that does more for education, spends more on the students, spends more dollars into public education with a variety of people that come into New York State. We are a diverse state. I'll say that again. We have every nationality, race, religion, you name it. We have them all here. So if there is a place where you will get the kind of advanced thinking to do what's right and requirement of flexibility, it's this state. It's where we are. So we are the leaders throughout the country. People come to New York State. We get them all the time visiting from other states and, frankly, other countries. We had them from Korea in the state capital just the other day, visiting, looking and talking to us about what we do here and how we do it. They're interested in what we do and how we do things. So they come here and they ask questions and they look to us as a guide. They're not going to take everything back, because, as I said before, not everything will apply. But they do come here. This is New York. You are in a leadership state, and be proud of it, because you did it. You, the citizenry, you, the public, have demanded of people like myself and my colleagues here that we make sure that education is funded and funded well. Education is one of the fastest growing parts of the state budget, second only to health. Between health and education, that's 70% of the New York State budget. So you're talking about two major areas, and education is right up there in the funding need, and it will always be that way, because we have to make sure that we're taking care of our kids, and we have to make sure that we're performing the function that is vitally important to the future of our nation, let alone our state.
When you mention diversity, you lead really to the next question. As with many Long Island communities, we are experiencing an increase in English language learners. The state mandates how to report and deliver ELL services to these children in a way that is very costly. There is no corresponding state funding to pay for these mandates. We understand the need for ELL services, but would you sponsor legislation to create immediate and dedicated funding separate from the state aid to pay for these services? Are you working for ways to find additional funding to meet this important need?
Yes, Part 154 as a regulation, unfortunately, like many of these mandates, was put forth for a good reason, but it's an example of a place where you need flexibility. Different districts have different populations and have different needs, and one of the things that frankly came about at the beginning of this and continues to be an issue is just being able to have adequate staff that can teach in these areas. And that was a perfect example of something where, if the districts had the opportunity to say, this is how we are educating these students, perhaps the state education department could have at that point said, okay, that works for us, that achieves the goals we want to meet, and we go from there. So that's definitely an issue that has come up in the last few budgets to try to drive aid specifically to address that issue, and it's something that we have to continue, because it's another mandate on top of so many others.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah, and also along those lines, one of the big areas, because I hear from from several of the different districts that I have, school districts that I have that have an influx of immigrant children and English language problems, and not only is the funding an issue, but it's the students they have to work with that need extra help above that. Some of these students come from countries where they're actually illiterate in their own native language. They can't read, write, or speak in their own native language. So they're behind the 8 ball twice when they come into the school district. So it's not only a question for the underlying funding for the program itself, it's how do we address and how do we provide funding for the other difficulties that they have when they come here. Some of them it's medical, some of them it's physical disabilities, some of them it's emotional disabilities or educational disabilities. So they come with all these issues on top of that. So it's just not one issue of funding the program itself, it's that we really have to look at these other underlying problems and tailor each district's needs, both financially and supporting the teachers to deliver the services and the necessary social services staff and medical staff in the schools to help address these other underlying issues, to make it a more productive course also.
This all makes sense. I think we're all in agreement, but I don't think any of us want to leave you with the false impression that a freestanding bill passed by both houses will get past a veto from the governor. The governor's responsibility is to make sure that the state doesn't spend too much money. Cuomo's attitude, and I think may have been different. I mean, I started with Pataki. I think it was a little looser then in terms of passing monetary bills.
It was.
But Cuomo's attitude, for better or worse, and I guess from a budgetary point of view, it's for the better, as difficult as it is. Spending measures have to be in the budget. So we all fight to increase the amount of money spent on public education. And if we can figure out a way to make sure that the districts that are most in need of ELL extra dollars because of their diverse populations get it, we'd all be happy to do that. But I strongly suspect that a freestanding bill would easily pass in both houses and then would be vetoed by Governor Cuomo, not out of any evil intent, but just out of a matter of making sure, out of a sense of making sure that all major funding proponents are in the budget. And I hate to share that with you, but I don't want you to have the misapprehension that a freestanding bill is going to save the day.
Okay. With the 16-17 budget, the gap elimination adjustment, borrowing from public school funding to pay for other areas of New York State budget, was finally ended. But the state has not paid back the money it borrowed from schools in the form of GEA funds and has still not met its obligation for foundation aid to public schools as determined by the New York State Court of Appeals in 2003. When do you think New York will abide by the Court of Appeals decision?
Carl's going to answer that.
Let's see. About 3,000. In the year 3,000. No, I don't think you're going to see a day when all that money is going to be repaid because it'd be a never-ending process. And that would mean generating the money from someplace else. What I'd rather see is money generated and raised get put into current education, get put into current foundation aid formula, get put into teaching English as a second language. The high-need schools, for example, have an increase. This budget, for example, provides about $200 million, the governor's budget, for high-need schools. That's schools within districts that are not doing all that well, that need help. That may be schools with a large number of English language learners that are behind in that skill. They need extra money. So we don't want to lose that. We want to make sure that we fund those sort of things and make sure that the money can go there without depriving the other schools within that same district of the educational revenue that they need to foster a good program and to make sure that the kids get what they need. Proper laboratories, proper teachers who can do their jobs, who are in license. We have a problem in many areas of getting teachers who are in license teaching. If you have a physics license and if you're a licensed physics teacher, you're worth your weight in gold because you can't find them. If you're a licensed chemistry teacher, difficult to find licensed chemistry teachers these days because they can make more money working for Amazon or Apple. They'll pay them huge amounts of money to come there rather than go into the schools where you're not going to necessarily become rich overnight. So we need to foster the fact that we want to bring kids here. We want to keep money to entice good students, good teachers, and to make sure that we meet every year in the state of New York. I think, let me check that. Every year in the city, when I taught in the city, and I taught in the city for 20 years, we were 10,000 teachers short, out of license.
Wow.
And every single year, we're forced to teach out of license because we just didn't have enough of the teachers we needed. We couldn't find the teachers that we needed. And that was a problem for the city. And it's a problem for a lot of areas in the state. So we've got to make sure and address that. As I said before, though, education, the fastest growing part of the state budget, and will continue to be, followed only by health, very closely by health. And these are two major areas, obviously.
So let's move on. Nassau Community College is the largest single-campus community college in New York and is the first choice for 1 out of 5 college-bound high school graduates in Nassau County. Its charter calls for funding to come from 3 equal parts: 1/3 Nassau County, 1/3 New York State, and 1/3 tuition. Yet the county and state haven't raised their contribution in 5 years. Tuition has gone up to fill this gap, covering over 40% of the cost, and enrollment has been declining steadily. While this cannot be seen as a direct correlation, it does raise the question, where is the funding to back our government officials' desire to support higher education at an institution with almost 20,000 students? And a follow-up question is, will the new Excelsior program make a difference in making a Nassau education more affordable?
It's not only Nassau Community College, but it's the community colleges throughout the state of New York who have suffered a shortage of funds from their counties and from the state. In part, we are still suffering from the recession years in which there were substantial cutbacks across the board. In the end, this all boils down to how much money is there available to distribute to public higher education. And I don't think any of us would sit here and say, we have been able to spend enough on public higher education over the years. And even though that is true, the SUNY system has improved dramatically over the course of the last 8 to 10 years. And our community colleges, especially Nassau Community, even though it has had some unique challenges, are wonderful places to get an education. And it still costs quite a bit of money for a student to go there, but it's a whole lot less than that student would spend almost anywhere else. So we continue to fight to provide more and more money. This year there will be a little bit more for public higher education. It is never enough, but this is our challenge, to find the dollars and to make sure they get spent appropriately.
Okay. Ed?
Well, and I would just add to that, there's, one of the things we've seen with this Excelsior scholarship, which is certainly great if you qualify for it, obviously not so great if you don't, but it has brought up a conversation about a lot of other things that go into the equation when somebody's looking at higher education. And that's everything from, if they're living on a campus or renting an apartment, the cost of that, the cost of books. For many, it's the cost of childcare, which has come up in the last few budgets. The legislature has been able to fight for restorations on the campus at Nassau Community. They have this great program, the Children's Greenhouse, which is, serves students. And really, I've had the opportunity to meet some of these parents. They flat out will tell you, I'm not here going to school if I don't have access to this on the campus. And that's something the legislature has fought for and secured funding for over the last few budgets. So there's a lot of different things that go into that equation in addition to just the direct aid that impacts the tuition. It's all those associated costs that we have to continue to fight for.
Okay. Let's move on to water. When the Glenwood Landing power plant was decommissioned, Senator Marcelino and Assemblyman Levine secured $5.4 million in state aid for the North Shore School District to help offset the burden of the shifting taxes as the result of the decommissioning. Thank you both for getting this money for the district. At this time, many in the community are experiencing very high water bills, which some believe is due to taxes shifting from LIPA to New York American Water, and then being passed on to ratepayers. The special state money intended to provide short-term relief and to enable the school district to reduce its annual levy has caused confusion and even anger in our community. Some believe that this money can and should, some believe that the school can and should disperse that state aid to individual homeowners to help pay for their very high water bills. Senator Marcelino and Assemblyman Levine, would you please explain the intent you had in providing these funds to the school district, and if there's any legal authority for the school district to use any of these funds to pay homeowners' water bills?
To my knowledge, there's no legal authority to use that money to pay somebody else's water bills. The money was applied to the district to be used to offset the loss of the tax revenue paid by the by the power plant. When you lost that, we provided about $5 million to go in over it was a 10-year glide, so that over that period of time, the district would offset the cost with the loss of the thing, with using the $5 million to backfill, so you wouldn't feel it. The residents wouldn't get whacked at the same time all at once with the thing, with the increase in taxes. So we want that there. We want that to offset costs, not to be used to pay somebody's water bills. That would disappear overnight. And then what do you do? While you're paying that water bill off, you'd still have the increase in your school taxes and your increase in everything else that would go up. So we want them to back off. We want the money to be used to offset the loss of the revenue from the power plant.
So I agree with Carl, and I want to make clear that I think 4.4 million came from the Senate and 1 million came from the Assembly. So that's one observation. Number two, the intent was that those, and there's 3 points. Number two, the obvious intent was that those dollars were to be used to ease the property tax burden because we had suffered such a loss. Now, this has been done a few other times throughout the state of New York. Thirdly, as someone who spent many, many years practicing criminal defense law in our federal courts, I don't think the school district would be wise to engage in any such conduct unless we all want to be grand jury witnesses and worse. No, it can't be done. It sounds good on a certain level, and I know that people are anxious and desperate, and when we're anxious and desperate, we want to try to come to some kind of a quick resolution. It should not be done. And I mean no disrespect to whoever came up with the idea whatsoever, but it's not the right thing. There is no legal authority to do it, and I think it would be illegal to do that.
Part of the problem that we're dealing with is legislation that we've put in, that I've put in, to have an independent auditor. First we thought we could get the comptroller's office to come in and do it, and do an audit of American Water and what they do. We found out in my conversations with Tom DiNapoli, the comptroller of the state, that we can't do that. We legally can't get them involved directly. So now we're going back to the PSC, and we amended the bill. We're going back to the PSC and saying, you must hire an independent auditor, an outside auditor, not somebody working for the PSC, but an outside auditor to come in, and every time American Water comes up with some kind of a rate, it has to be reconciled through that evaluator, through that auditor. And they just can't go in there and slap on rates as they see fit. Right now, they've all of a sudden discovered the other day that they made a mistake. You read the papers? I mean, oh, shock of shocks. We made a mistake. We didn't know how many assets we had. And we overestimated, and therefore we're going to return the money that we took from our customers over a 4-year period at no interest. So they took the money that they now realized that they weren't entitled to, which makes me wonder, when they bought the company from, I think it was a company called Aqua, when they bought it from Aqua, didn't they know what they were buying? Didn't they know how many hookups, how many towers, how many miles of pipe and all the rest of that stuff? I'm sure they did, but according to them, they didn't. I find that hard to believe. They're somewhat disingenuous in their conversations. I would use other words, but I don't want to
Let me-
at this point in time.
And let me follow up with two other things. They've got to go, my understanding is they have to go back to the PSC to adjust their rate to return the money that they overcharged. I understand as well they're going to have to go back to, the Public Service Commission, because the new tax plan for all the trouble it's causing us seems to contain some kind of a provision. Even though it's costing you and me an extra 25% in our taxes, it contains some sort of a provision that discounts or saves power companies and water companies like New York American Water 14% in their taxes. So that's a pretty good deal. Now, my understanding is that they've got to go back to the PSC to factor in that particular savings as well. Now, the savings for, and I'm almost done, the savings for the overcharge will use themselves up over the course of several months. And the 14% that they save as a tax windfall will also run out over a period of time. So we still have our work cut out for us. Some of you may have a copy of a press release on a bill I just introduced today that mandates that any time any company, any water company, power company wants to raise its rates, they have to do something that that has not been required in the past. The Public Service Commission will be affirmatively tasked with the responsibility of reaching out to the congressional representatives for the district affected, the senators for the state senators for the district affected, the assembly members, and local elected officials as well, so that these things are not going to happen in the dark the way they have occurred in the past. Now I only wish I could tell you that's a panacea, but I think we'd all tell you in government, just as in real life, there are no panaceas. This is a continuing, constant battle, but we're in this together, and I'm glad that some meager amount of progress has been made. And to George and Larry and Agatha and the others of you who've been so passionately involved in this, your voices were heard, and that's a good thing.
Mike?
Yeah, just to touch on a couple of things with what's been said already is, so it was divulged that they overestimated their assessment when they reported it to the PSC, which caused the spike in the taxes. So it's not really the carryover from the loss of the monies at the Power Authority. This increase in their assessment, the 60% increase in their assessment this past year, came from them overstating the value of their assets. And so one of the troubling things that I see with their habit is so now they're caught and they have to return this money. So now they'll make an application to the PSC and to the OPS, Office of Public Real Estate Assessment, to reduce their assessment. And every time they go and reduce their assessment, they get to keep some of the refund to pay their attorney, and then they get to keep 50% of the refund. And why, I don't understand, they're getting to keep anything that they never paid. It was the ratepayer that paid. So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at. And just talking about that glide path for a second, so the money allocated for 10 years, the $5.4 million, in my understanding was to be allocated over a period of the 10 years. So whatever the yearly loss was from the Power of Authority, so let's say it was $100,000 to the school district for the year, you would take from that $5.4 million $100,000, put it in the bank as if you got the tax receipt, and it shouldn't affect the homeowners or the taxpayers at all. So that's the way that should be applied over that 10-year period till it's gone. Also, every year, the Senator and the Assembly, with Chuck, introduces legislation to stop the county assessor from shifting more than 1% of an assessment into the property owners. And the Senator may want to speak on that so he's more clearer on it than I am, to stop your assessment from increasing by more than 1% because of the loss of the power plant's revenue. So there's a lot of different things.
Private property owners.
Private property owners. So there are a lot of different things that are in the mix that are going on. But with American Water, we have a lot of legislation pending, that addresses several different things. So we're on top of them, and hopefully there'll be some more relief, significant relief, coming in the short term.
So since you've mentioned the legislation you've introduced, Senator Marcellino and Assemblyman Montesano, you have both introduced a bill that amends Statute 585-D of the state property law so that American Water would not have any property taxes and therefore could not pass through their property taxes to ratepayers in this district. Looking at this from the point of view of our water bill, this seems great. However, the taxes assessed to American Water have been and continue to be used for funding our county, towns, schools, and villages. Where will the money not collected from American Water come from?
Well, each one, first of all, the piece of legislation only enables all the local entities to do the exemption. So say for argument's sake, if the bill passes and signed into law by the governor, the school district, so to speak, now North Shore School District, has the decision to make, the board has a decision to make. Do they issue the exemption to American Water for their portion of the taxes they impose upon them or not? Just like the veterans exemption, the volunteer firemen's exemption, the senior citizens exemption, the school district would have to grant that exemption. And if it does, whatever that loss in taxes may be to the district, the county will do what it does all the time. It will spread it across all the other class of property owners across the 4 different classes of taxes: commercial, residential, condos, and industrial, things of that nature. One of the pet peeves I have, and was speaking to some people about it this past week, is because we're seeing it again with PSE&G in the town of Hempstead, is really, in my humble opinion, and this, will be taken by people different ways, is that if tax revenue goes down because a business closes, a power plant closes, or American Water gets an exemption from property tax, whatever causes a decline in tax revenue, then accordingly, in my opinion, the budgets of all the affected entities should be going down also. You shouldn't be able to spend what you don't have. In our homes, if your income goes down, you reduce your spending. So you don't go to your neighbor and say, look, I lost $300 this week in my pay, you have to make it up for me. So it shouldn't have to work that way with the government entities either. Some people agree, some people disagree. So if there's a $500,000 loss to the county of Nassau, well, it's $500,000 less they're going to have in their budget. They shouldn't have to spread that tax loss over to everybody else. And I think that's something we need to address. It's in law, and I think that law has to be revisited and changed.
Okay. So let's move on. Let's move on to the tax cap. The tax cap is extremely popular on Long Island. The tax cap, now in effect for 6 years, needs some modification to avoid serious consequences such as a negative cap, as well as changes to balance tax breaks to industrial development agencies and utilities in the form of pilots. What modification of the tax cap are you currently working on, if any, and what modifications are most critical to achieving this balance and supporting high-quality public education?
I was going to say, first and foremost with this, I really don't see too many major modifications being made to that in the current climate. Particularly, it's not something that I think is on the, and this is just being honest with everybody. I don't think it's something that the governor is looking to do, and I think it's more complicated right now in light of the federal tax law and the change in terms of the being able to have that exemption for your state and local taxes. So I think that's a complicating factor. One of the things, though, over the last couple years, obviously, that has come up repeatedly, we've talked about things like pilots, BOCES capital. The thing about those types of exemptions is that there are districts that they would really be great for, and then there are districts that they wouldn't be so great for. And I think that's at least part of why they don't necessarily get too many legs under them. There was actually, legislation that initially made that kind of something that Tax and Finance could do, and they really decided not to implement it. So I think looking at the number itself, I know one of the issues that came up a few years ago was the number going 0. And I don't think that's something that anybody ever intended to have happen. And that's one that maybe you see. But overall, I don't see in the current administration there being major shifts in the way the tax cap functions.
Mike?
And just this year, in this year's proposed budget, in the governor's proposed budget, the tax cap for schools, the comptroller reports, is fixed at 2% this year, so it's not below 2%. The schools will get the full 2% this year, and then we'll see how things move forward. Usually it was based on some formula the comptroller had, so the tax cap would be at 1%, 1.25%. So this year it's a full 2%. And like Ed said, down the line, maybe some of the things will be materialized, but it doesn't seem to be that way for this coming year.
The rationale underlying the original imposition of the tax cap, and this was made clear in the study that was commissioned when Spitzer was governor, was this. We know we'll collect less tax dollars if we stick to the cap from our communities. The state will then make up that difference. Now, the fact of the matter is the state has not been able to always make up that difference, and as Carl mentioned, even when the state comes in with dollars, there's no guarantee that each and every school district gets to share in those dollars in such a way that they're guaranteed at least 2% increase over the years. Here's the danger. We'll get by. We'll squeak by this year. But I'm in fear, and I suspect my colleagues are in fear as well, of what's our economic status going to be next year. And if the federal government itself shuts down tomorrow, there's going to be an additional crisis in confidence with respect to government's obligation and responsibility to take care of public education and to take care of health care. And these are, and you don't need me to tell you, these are the most difficult times. These are the most difficult times economically that I've ever seen in my life. And where we're all going, I don't know. I'm glad you're all here so that I can, you can send me a bill for therapy to listen to me. But these are dangers, and we can't underestimate them.
Last year's budget for New York State was $152 billion. Last year's budget. This year's proposed budget by the governor, because it's the only budget that sits out there, is $168 billion. If you look at that budget, and we've begun to look at it and dissect it, you find a shifting of money, increased fees, which are really taxes, but he calls them fees so that, money that went one place goes to another place, things like that. So it's a shell game to a certain extent. So we're going to have to take a look at that carefully. The two houses are in the process now of beginning to get together their committees and put together the budgets for the Assembly and the budget for the Senate. The merging of the three is what we're here to deal with. And that's what we're going to be dealing with in the next few weeks. By the end of March, we will have to have come together on an agreed single spending plan, because that's what a budget is. It's a spending plan. It's how you're going to spend the dollars that are allocated. We have to figure out how many, what we're going to allocate and where the cuts are going to have to be made. And there will have to be cuts in that $168 billion because it's supported by a whole host of taxes and fees, many of which I frankly cannot and will not support.
Aren't you glad we cheered you up?
Definitely. Would any of you care to comment on the modification that would treat pilots, tax breaks given to certain properties as part of industrial development agency deals and to certain utility properties, similar to other properties in terms of increasing value over time as the economy increases?
I don't even know what that means.
I think I know what it means. And there's no one-size-fits-all approach, because there are times that that pilot agreements, if done properly, enhance a community's value, and their design ought to be not to give some kind of fire sale break to a developer, but their design is supposed to be to make sure, to give that developer an assurance of how much taxes that developer's project will actually pay over the course of generally a 10-year period of time. We have seen certain industrial development agencies and certain municipalities that have entered into these arrangements with no small amount of corruption. and everybody ends up paying the price. There are any number of bills that are trying to reform the ways industrial development agencies work and conduct themselves, and I think that that's got to be the direction we go in, as opposed to a wide-ranging philosophical bill that's going to deal with the evils of payments in lieu of taxation. I just don't see that that's going to work.
You also have to make sure that if you make an agreement with a company, that they stick to the agreement, and they're held to the agreement. Many times you'll have an agreement, and for whatever reason the company can't make it. They go belly up and they walk away, and there's no penalty. They got breaks, they got tax credits, they got all kinds of rewards, but they didn't pay it back. And then they leave, and there's no mechanism to go get them. I do not like that, and I'm seriously looking at legislation to prevent that. If you engage in a deal, you stick to the deal. And if you're going to walk away from it, there has to be a penalty. Because you got to return what you were given. Because you were given it in good faith that you were going to perform. You were going to create so many jobs. You were going to create so much in tax revenue. Well, you find out that instead of creating 10 jobs, they created 2. Thank you very much. That wasn't the deal. And you should make up the difference. And that's where we're going to go with that.
We may also have way too many industrial development agencies on Long Island. They're competing with each other. They go on television and radio, and they spend money that should be used to subsidize and help the taxpayers to compete with each other to get business, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because the savvy business people know where the industrial development agencies are, and they know where the economic development programs are.
Okay. Other states with tax caps do not require a public vote to approve the school budget if it's at or below the tax cap, and require only a simple majority to pass the budget if it's above the tax cap. Would you be supportive of this kind of legislation?
Who's going to go first? Yes.
Maybe.
Okay, so we have a yes and a maybe. Are there any other answers before we move on? Okay.
I think one of the things is the way that the question is proposed. There are states that kind of do it as a dual question, which I thought was an interesting idea that came out a few years ago when the tax cap came out for renewal. But I think the reality is the tax cap affects school districts differently than it does other municipalities, because it has to go out to the public for a vote. So simplifying that process when it's within the cap is something that I would support.
Okay.
You also don't want to take the, excuse me, Mike, you also don't want to take the public's right to vote out of the picture.
Okay.
They should have the right to vote. They should have the right to say yes or no. We like it, we don't like it. They're going to pay the bill. They should have a say in what the bill is.
Would a majority be sufficient?
Yeah, frankly.
Okay. So let's move on. The North Shore School District and all of Long Island has suffered too many losses due to opiate overdoses. One loss is really too many. This not only affects the families who have lost loved ones, but the entire community. As a result, we have formed North Shore Coalition Against Substance Abuse that has been meeting on a regular basis for nearly a year. We've put together a committed board of directors and are in the midst of a strategic plan in dealing with this crisis. In order to measure our effectiveness, we need to study and evaluate certain data to enable us to focus our energies in the most productive and effective way. To this end, we need our first responders, the healthcare industry, and private medical providers to share with us the number, age, and sex, as well as geographic location, but preserving privacy. It's critical that we preserve privacy, of overdoses in the community. We understand HIPAA regulations and we're supportive. We're not looking to modify those regulations or to not to comply. Will each of you comment in a letter or commit in a letter requesting that North Shore CASA be provided with quarterly reports from local healthcare providers, first responders, and area physicians with the aforementioned critical information? With this, we'll be able to measure the effectiveness of our efforts in fighting the opioid scourge in the community.
I just, on that matter, for some reason, and maybe my colleagues may have a different view, I think that those statistics are maintained by Nassau County Department of Health. I know New York State Department of Health maintains statistical data. I don't think that we're able to mandate providers, whether it be a hospital or private doctors or substance abuse places, to divulge their information to another organization. But I believe that statistical data is readily available from Nassau County Department of Health and State Department of Health that they could share that information. I know the CDC also keeps statistical data on these types of incidents because that's how we find out about it. We don't get independent information from medical providers, whether they be on North Shore hospitals or any of those different places. They don't share that information with anybody, and it would be impossible for them to do that. But they do have to report to the county health department all types of diseases, illnesses, poisons, overdoses, and things of that nature. So I think I would certainly support that in asking the Nassau County Department of Health to make that information readily available for that.
Yeah, there was state legislation a couple of years ago that expanded the data, including making sure that reports didn't just include fatal overdoses, but all overdoses, because, there were people that were, the same person was overdosing multiple times, and thankfully, because the training has been more widespread, they were able to revive them. But one of the requirements in that was that the information be given to the local counties on a regular basis, more so than just the annual reporting that the Commissioner of Health at the state level would do. So I think that would be the appropriate avenue to get the data from the county, because they should be being provided it.
Okay, thank you.
I think as someone who lost a close relative, my sister-in-law died because of opiate abuse. Now, that wasn't recently. That was nearly 40 years ago, and I'll share this with you. We did everything humanly possible, and it didn't work. So I don't mean to pretend to anybody that I know the answer to this, but there's something I do know. I know that the earlier you reach children with education and with peer education, which is what this district is doing, the more successful you'll be over the long run. With respect to the letter, I'm happy to take a look at it, and we'll find out. I'll find out from my counsel if it's appropriate or legal for us to make the, well, not for us to make the request. It's always legal to make the request, but to see if we can get the response that we want. And let me finally mention that the governor's budget this year includes an extra $26 million, which is a 4.5% increase for opiate treatment in the state of New York, and we had record sums last year. We know this is a problem, and if anybody here knows exactly what we do to solve it, share it with us, because we'll be glad to do it. Thank you.
Many districts, I know I've attended them, have done some Narcan training, and I keep a kit in my car with me in case it has to be used. That sort of training should be done through the schools, through any official entity, any village, any entity or municipality that you can think of should be offering that kind of training to the public so that people are aware of what you can do, how to do it, and what's necessary. Education is key to these things. You got to know what's going on, you got to know the signs, and you got to know how to deal with it carefully. Now, this is not the end and be all of it all, but that would help and go a long way towards preventing someone who's overdosing going too far in that situation. The other aspect is the need to, again, identify what's going on. Parents have to be aware of what's going on with their children. They have to be aware of what's going on. Doctors, well, I had a hip replacement about a year ago. They provided me with painkillers. Now, I got a vial of painkillers, must have had about 50 pills in it. I took 2. That's all that was necessary. I'm not unique. I mean, I'm not a glutton for pain, believe me. But the nature of the beast was I only needed 2. There's 48 others still sitting there. And I took them over to the 2nd Precinct, and they disposed of them for me. That's what you can do. There's ways to deal with that. Overprescription is a key element here. Putting too much, I bet you if you go through your medicine chest, you'll find out you've got stuff in the medicine chest that could be years old, that's been sitting there, and there's no need for it. The trick is to get rid of it, but not flush it. We don't want it in the groundwater. Right. But we want it disposed of properly. So the local police department or your local hospital will do that for you, free of charge. They'll be happy to do it. And that's what we should do. Clean this stuff out. And doctors not to prescribe more than is absolutely necessary. And if a patient needs more, then you give them more if it's necessary. But if it's not, there's no reason to give somebody 50 pills when they only need 2. And that's a key element here.
Okay. Anyone else, Mike?
Yeah, just quickly, there's been a lot of legislation out there in dealing with this, but like in last year's budget, the 17-18 budget, $6 million was allocated for Narcan kits and training. We allocated $27 million for state-operated addiction treatment centers, $9 million for crisis detox services, $21 million for outpatient services, $41 million for opioid treatment programs, $9 million for housing units, and $65 million for residential treatment beds. And as Chuck Levine indicated, there's a substantial increase on top of that coming out of this year's budget. So we're doing our best on the state level to get money out to the counties and different jurisdictions and state agencies to help combat this. We also have legislation pending that limits what a doctor can prescribe in the opioids. There was one bill, some piece of legislation went through to limit a doctor's prescription to 7 days on the first visit, and then if there was a subsequent visit, to make it only another 5-day. Now we're looking to change that 5-day down to 3 days. So it would be a 5-day prescription on your first visit, and on a subsequent visit, a 3-day allotment. Some of the issues that we run into when you propose this type of legislation is the pushback from the communities, because when you have to go back to the doctor the second time for that, get a refill on the prescription, you have to pay a copay for the doctor. So we're looking to see, is it feasible for the doctor to give that additional 3-day prescription, over the telephone. And then, we have the iStop program that's in effect that the physicians have to use before they give these prescriptions out to see that there's no shopping going on by the patient. And we're also trying to implement that for hospital emergency rooms to use the same iStop system before they issue a prescription for these controlled substances.
Let me just mention one other thing. We are here because of this school district. And I learned last week something I didn't know, because it's all about educating our kids. And let me mention as well that my daughter, when she was in high school and junior high school, was a peer AIDS educator. And those kids saved people's lives. In the North Shore District, you have a certain group or a club which is composed of gay and lesbian students and straight students. And I understand that club is growing and growing in size and energy. And it focuses on keeping kids from getting bullied and making sure that each child is treated with the dignity that that child deserves. I think that is something really special. I'd love to see that implemented, along with peer education for substance abuse in all our school districts. And maybe if we move away from spending so much money on testing our students, we can help to educate our students to be better prepared to deal with the real dangers of the world that they are going to face.
Let's do a follow-up question on the prescription response that we were given. States have the authority to make physician licensure dependent on registering using prescription drug monitoring programs, PDMPs, when prescribing controlled substances. Where does Long Island stand in the use of PDMPs and physician compliance with this? Which state and local agencies are working with the DEA to implement prescription drug monitoring programs at the local level? And what should be the consequences to medical professionals who are not in compliance?
So my understanding is, since iStop went into effect, that is a monitoring system. before a physician can issue a prescription for a controlled substance, he has to access this database and put in the patient information to see, first of all, can he give it to this particular patient, but also when all these physicians now, when they issue a prescription for controlled substances, it's all computerized. They take out their phone, there's an app there that they use, and that prescription is entered electronically and transmitted to the pharmacist electronically. That is then recorded into a database that the State Department of Health monitors and uses, as well as the pharmacist then has to access the iStop database to do the same thing. So there's now a computerized record that watches how many prescriptions medical providers are issuing for controlled substances, how many, and what the pharmacies are distributing also. They look for common threads in the same person filling the prescriptions at different pharmacies. And so here in Nassau County and on Long Island, so we have the Narcotics Task Force made up of law enforcement officers from every one of our police departments, including the Federal Drug Enforcement Task Force and the New York State Police. And they have this task force that this is just exactly what they do to ensure that there's compliance. And that's why occasionally you see a story on the news or in the newspaper that shows a medical provider has been indicted and arrested for improperly writing out prescriptions for controlled substances, selling the prescriptions, giving out more than what they're supposed to. So the system is in place and it is working. Like anything else, you always have something fall through the cracks, but they do monitor the compliance, and when physicians go astray of what the regulations are, they could have their license suspended, they could have their license revoked, they could be sent for retraining, they could also, be indicted, as many of them have.
Now, we had promised our public officials that we would end this session at 9 o'clock, but we really still have a lot of questions, and I'm going to ask them if they would be willing to extend would 15 minutes be reasonable, and are you willing to?
Frankly, I can't.
You can't?
No, I have a place to be shortly.
Okay.
So that the 9 o'clock limitation is a key for me, as I told you earlier.
You did. You were very clear with that. It is 1 minute after 9.
Well, I'll take Carl's 15 minutes, and let's make it 30 minutes, because I have no problem boring the hell out of people.
But
I was supposed to take Carl home and put him to bed, but I'll stay for the
All
other
right.
15 minutes, so that's right.
Senator Marcellino, thank you very much. You were very clear from the beginning, and we tried very hard to complete the evening by 9. And thanks to the three of you for being willing to stay a little bit longer.
15's good.
I promise you, 9:30 is now the...
No, 9:15.
9:15?
9:15.
Let me get out of your way.
How about 9:45? Look how people are leaving.
Let's go for 9:20. I'm not a...
Herman, can I ask, are these the fight judges down here?
Definitely, they matter. I want to ask the natural tax question. I'm going to cut some of these questions a little bit short to really get to the key point of the questions. What do you expect the impact of the federal tax law will be on state budgets as you understand it? What's going to happen? What's going to happen to our middle class? Will there be a penalty, and what magnitude will that penalty be? So, not an easy question given the information we have, but I think one that's on all of our minds.
I think there's, because of the freshness of that being adopted, I mean, you saw, the governor was looking to include something in the budget that he's looking for something that would be a dramatic overhaul of our state income tax system, and it wasn't ready in time. They put out a report yesterday. So I think that's something that everybody collectively is trying to work through. What the impact is are there things at the state level that we can do to mitigate that? But I think it does, at the end of the day, bring things back home in terms of really looking at what we do at a state level. As the senator said, I mean, we have $168 billion budget proposed. And that funds a lot of great things, but there's other things in there that I think that we really need to look at our spending on. Some of the major initiatives that the administration has put forth on the economic development side, where you see we're not always getting our bang for our buck on it. So I think we do have to look for ways that we can help out with the added burden that that's going to put on our taxpayers. There's no question, but I think we also have to, I think it puts a little bit of a spotlight on a state like New York that is a high tax state.
And anyone else?
All the complex states, all the sophisticated states, all the industrial states, states with large populations, states with immigrant populations, are high tax states, each and every one of them. We get every year reports from this tax institute and that tax institute that tell us that New York is the worst place on earth. My colleagues in the legislatures in Illinois, in Massachusetts, in New Jersey, and in California, wouldn't you know it, they get the same reports from the same so-called think tanks in their states. What the federal government did is going to cause untold tragedy in our states. It is going to make it all the more difficult for us to live on Long Island. And the utter irony is this, that for as long as I can remember, New York State has sent a lot more money to the federal government than we ever get back. And I believe this year we will send close to $50 billion to the federal government that we won't get back. Over the years, that money has been used to subsidize our fellow citizens in Utah, in Wyoming, all these places where the rugged individualists who survive on their own live. Well, they can't survive on their own without our subsidies. And now the utter irony is this. The complex states are going to be bankrupted. We are not going to be able to provide public education for our children. We are not going to be able to provide health services for our children. Now, that doesn't matter a whole lot if you live in some remote region in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan or Montana, where to go to a hospital, you've got to drive an hour or 2 or 3 hours. But it matters here in the densely populated metropolitan areas where disease can be transferred so utterly rapidly. I know that what I'm saying to you is anything but optimistic. But all I can tell you is this, that I am saying this in as measured a way as I am capable of saying this, because I am outraged, and we all should be outraged at what has happened to New York State and the other major states in this country. And those are, by the way, the states where people can go if they want to have upward mobility. If you don't want to have upward mobility, stay in Texas, stay in Utah, stay wherever you want. The complex states are the economic drivers of this nation. We are going to suffer an awful consequence in New York and throughout the nation. I hate to tell you that.
Let's move on to traffic, infrastructure, and environment. We've gotten a lot of terrific questions from the audience, so I'm not going to go to the prepared questions, and instead, to give the audience an opportunity to ask their questions, I'm going to take the 2 infrastructure questions that have come up this evening and ask those. So the first one is, was RXR permitted to build condos in Glen Cove without there being a traffic study and a school study? And if yes, how did something like that happen? And I guess the follow-up question is, will a builder be allowed to build more condos on the Engineers Country Club property without having all the proper studies, if that in fact was done? Do you want?
I'm sorry, Herman. The question with respect to RXR, the bottom line part of the question?
Were the condos built without a traffic study first and a school study in terms of the impact?
I don't know. I thought there had been some kind of traffic study. With respect to a school study, I don't know. I think Amy Marion was here before. Amy may know better than I do. I don't know whether the Glen Cove School District weighed in on that or not. I was not directly involved in that process. And with respect to engineers, I think it's still very early to say whatever is going to happen there.
I mean, any development they would want to do with engineers, they would have to make their application before the Planning and Zoning Board and for the town, and because that's who would regulate that. So, and then they would, if an application of that nature was to come before them, then they would order the studies that are required. You know, environmental impact studies, traffic studies, and then whatever impact it may have on schools. It also looks at impact on water utility, fire departments, and things of that nature also. So it looks at all that.
Another infrastructure question. The governor has advocated for shared resources across municipalities as a money-saving measure. Since each of you represents multiple municipalities, what efforts are you working on to help your local representatives work across city-town borders?
Well, since the governor's requirement came into effect, I mean, I have multiple villages. I mean, we all have villages that we represent. I have a lot of villages, and they all are involved in shared services. The town of Oyster Bay has shared services with the county of Nassau and some of the villages. So what we're seeing now, most recently, in snow removal, in road repair, and things of that nature. The interesting part is that you have to know with some of these villages, especially the small villages up here on the North Shore, is that the administration, the mayor, the board of trustees, and the village judges in those villages are unpaid. They don't even get a salary. The only one that gets paid is the clerk, and they share a building inspector amongst 3 or 4 different villages, and their highway guy, who goes out and does the road repairs and things of that nature. In some villages, they all share the same people. So they've been doing this for a long period of time to begin with. I would say the villages probably operate the most efficiently out of all the government entities, to be quite frank with you. So the big sharing we're seeing is between the towns and the county. And then, of course, the state kicks in where it can also on the road repairs and road work. Infrastructure is, when you talk about different types of infrastructure, when it comes to the bridges and stuff like that, it's basically a function of state government. But I think we've made a lot of headway. I know I've made myself available to the different villages should they need something, but I have to tell you, the village mayors and through the Village Mayors Association, they've done a yeoman's job in really jumping on this and putting it through.
Thank you. Chuck and Ed?
We've all met with our local government representatives to get them, help persuade them, and help them get on board in terms of the plan that the governor wanted to see for shared services. And I'm sure that these plans, when executed, do save a certain amount of money. As New York State, however, is going to be hit very, very hard by this federal tax plan, I'm wondering how long we are going to be able to afford having as many different local governments as we have. And I'm a big fan of the village system of government. I agree with Michael. I think that it delivers superior services, but that's in danger as well. And on the subject of overall infrastructure, the United States of America needs about $4 trillion of infrastructure spending to and this is what the engineers tell us, just to get even today. We are nowhere close to having any plan to do that. Again, a consequence will be paid for that. A sad consequence.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the point of that initiative is to put the decision makers themselves in a room together, and so, but the governor, has pushed this in any of number of ways, dating back to when he was Attorney General, but I think our local governments have done that over time. That they talk to each other about whether it's maybe we can help out with sanitation, maybe we can help out. I have a couple that looked at, okay, maybe we can start repairing your trucks here because we have this facility, and then maybe you don't necessarily have a facility, you don't have to go pay some third party to do it. Things like that at the village level, I think end up being a real savings. But I would say that the Village Officials Association in Nassau County is very active in coming together. And now, as a result of this, the whole group is coming together, the town, county, and the villages, and trying to come up with ways to save money.
Major firms are pursuing large-scale development projects, some that may threaten environmentally sensitive areas and bring added congestion to communities. Many people, including the Committee for Sustainable Waterfront and the Coalition to Save Hempstead Harbor, are against the scale of these developments, but for developments on a smaller scale with fewer negative impacts. What assistance can you give to help communities facing large-scale developments to minimize the serious negative impacts on the community?
Well, the development, if anything, that goes on in different communities is controlled by that local entity. So if it's a project that's going to be of a large scale, so the county of Nassau would be involved, the relative town would be involved, and if it's in the confines of an incorporated village, that village would be involved. So the planning boards and zoning boards are the key elements. Those zoning boards and planning boards, the members that sit on them, of appointees of the elected officials within those entities. So in town of Oyster Bay, they appoint the members of the planning and zoning board, and same thing on the county level and a village level. So that's really the people that control that. There are state laws that regulate environmental protection, the environmental impact studies that have to be done, and they're already in place and play an important role in that development. I think, but the public has to stay cognizant of what's being proposed in their communities and take an active part in appearing before the planning board, appearing before the zoning board, and making their objections known. I always say, you could send your letters in to them, they go on the record. You could publicly appear at these hearings. We had a situation it's in Glen Cove, but up the block from where I live, which is Glen Head, where they wanted to put a 7-Eleven right on the corner of 4th Street and Cedar Swamp Road. And I addressed the planning and zoning board on 2 occasions, both as a resident and as the assemblyman, although I don't cover Glen Cove. Chuck does that, but it has an impact on Glen Head, and we spoke out, we brought out the weaknesses of the project, the potential problems, and twice they were denied their permit to put there what they wanted to put there. So it's up to the residents to become vocal, but there are rules and regulations in place that deal with the scope of a project, the impact it'll have on water usage, on waste. Sewage, cesspools, all these things are taken into consideration, but I think it's incumbent upon us as citizens and residents to make our voices heard at these different regulatory proceedings.
And there is, when you look at the state environmental laws and that process as you go through in a development, there are affirmative requirements that when issues are raised, that they be responded to. So it really is an official part of the process, that public input that Mike's talking about.
But as members of the Assembly, or speaking on behalf of Carl, members of the Senate, we don't have that much direct authority, or that much authority at all, over local development. And the best thing we can do is, as Michael said, speak out as private citizens, and also use our offices to help bring people together who are at odds over certain developmental issues, to try to stimulate some honest discussion, which in the end never hurts.
Let's go for 2 more questions, if that's okay with you. The decommissioning and demolition of the Glenwood Landing power plant has left us with a fallow, polluted piece of land that cannot be resold or developed. As a local legislature, would you be willing to bring pressure on New York State to remediate this pollution on what should be valuable waterfront property?
Yes, and I only wish Karen Barnaby was still here, because in the early days of the decommissioning of that building, which was really, I don't know if any of you were ever in it, was an amazing structure, the likes of which we will probably not see again. And I don't know 100%, I'm not 100% sure that it could have been repurposed, but it's just a shame that there wasn't the ability or the capacity to do some sort of report as to whether that building could have been utilized for another purpose, because it was constructed like a fortress. But that aside, that little story aside, yes, we'd always be happy to look to do whatever we can to improve the quality of life in the neighborhood and the way that piece of property looks.
Okay. Right. And then the last question, what do you find to be the most effective way to communicate with your constituents? What's the best way for constituents to convey their concerns to you?
Well, I mean, all of us have an assembly email. We have an assembly website. Today it's very easy. You just put our name in and it pops right up, and you could be on, like all of us here have the same thing, an assembly website, assembly email. Most of the correspondence I receive, I would say a good 90% of it is by email. And then I get the traditional long form handwritten letter. And then, of course, we get phone calls. So I think email is the best because it lets us keep a paper trail and everything is on paper. We can read it. We can refer back to it. We all, I think I can speak for my colleagues also. We all monitor our emails. We have staff that monitors them. We look at them and respond to them. So I think that's the preferred way, at least speaking for myself, because it just makes it easier for me. And also what helps really a lot is if you would put your address and phone number on the email. When you fill in those captions, when it pops up on our website and you want to send us an email, it asks us for that information. It just helps us get back, because a lot of times I get emails and there's something in the question or in the request that needs to be clarified, and there's no phone number. So, it just makes it more time consuming to try and track you down to get a phone number to call you, whether it be a cell number or work number. And the best reaction I always get is when I do call somebody and it's like, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm calling about your email. They said, you're actually calling. So yes, we do. But that's just if you include as much information as you can about an issue, especially if you're giving us a location. People write to us about the road is horrible on Route 107, but they don't say where on 107. So it helps if you give us a landmark, an address, or some roads that are in between.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think, any of those ways, is fine. We do, on certain issues, you still get, handwritten letters, and that's a lot of times the case with, if some organization is trying to get people to write about a specific issue. But yeah, I think email has become kind of the most common way of doing so. But what Mike said is important. We have the direct email address, but you also have the form that they have on the Assembly website, and if you don't provide all the information on there, it's hard to follow up.
Chuck, just 1 second, not to interrupt you. But also, if you on our websites, we have our press releases. We have a whole array of information on there. Things to look up. Some advisory things that are on there for points of information, newsletters, and everything like that. So there's a lot of information that you could garner from visiting our Assembly websites also.
So my office must get over 100 emails a day from all over the world. I'll get irate letters from people concerned about something in Australia or Brexit. And it's possible for emails from constituents just to get lost. I think the best thing to do is one of two things. Either just call and speak to any one of us, and that way we can find out where the road is bad on 107 directly, or make an appointment, or we'll meet you for coffee one day. We're easy enough to find, and certainly everyone who sat at this table is easy enough to reach out to. I'd like to see us go back to the personal touch. Again, I think it helps a whole lot.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the North Shore School District, Assemblyman Montesano, Assemblyman Ra, Assemblyman Levine, thank you so much for staying, for being dedicated, for doing what you're doing. Thanks to all our public officials who were here this evening. We very much appreciate what you do. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Herman, and thanks to each and every one of you. Thank you.